Well, greetings and welcome to episode 141 of Bible 180, 180 episodes between Genesis and Revelation. Today we're on John 11, the raising of Lazarus. Let me read the first 6 verses. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill, so the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it's for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now, a couple things about those verses. Jesus hears that Lazarus is ill, and he says, this illness is for God's glory. It's not going to lead to death. He hears he's ill, and he thinks, well, I know what God is doing. He's going to be okay. He's sick, but God is going to be glorified, and people will come through his illness to see the glory of God. Keep that in mind, that through what was happening in the life of Lazarus, God being glorified, through this experience with raising Lazarus, the Pharisees and scribes started looking even more intently for a way to arrest Jesus and put him to death. In the next chapter, chapter 12, Jesus enters Jerusalem on what we call Palm Sunday, and the whole events of Holy Week, the death of Jesus, resurrection, was going to take place. So with John 11, this is the last public healing that Jesus does. Remember, there's 7 signs that Jesus does in the Gospel of John. So the raising of Lazarus brings about, in this last healing, the 7th healing sign, the height of opposition toward Jesus, the last of the sign, and it leads to Jesus and the final week of his life, all being done for the glory of God. Notice the second thing about those verses. Jesus hears that Lazarus is sick, and he stays there for another 2 days. He loved Lazarus, but he stayed. He loved, but he waited 2 days. Lazarus is clearly sick, and Jesus waited. Clearly, had Jesus taken Pastoral Care 101 at the seminary, one of the questions of the final exam would be, what do you do when someone who is sick? And if Jesus would have answered, you wait 2 days, he would have flunked the final exam. But interesting, what Jesus was doing was meeting their deepest need instead of satisfying their immediate want, right? Deepest need rather than immediate want. Jesus waited. Sometimes love waits. That's what love sometimes does. It waits. Jesus waited because it was the right thing for all involved. Jesus waited because he understood the timing of God more than anyone else. Have you ever had to wait for God to work? You might even be waiting for God right now, waiting for God to work through an illness, through the healing of a family relationship. You might be waiting for a marriage to get better. You might be waiting for a biopsy result or whatever it is. Have you ever waited for God to work? And if you're waiting to God to work right now, remember what Jesus did, because he waited 2 days. He trusted God's timing, because he knew in God's timing that everything is good, even though we might not understand it or get what we want for our immediate needs. In waiting, sometimes our deeper needs are met instead of having our immediate wants satisfied. I'll tell you what, that's a hard lesson, because I want my immediate needs met right now. But in a sense, if I think about it, what I want is my deeper needs to be met. And the longer I live and the more I study the Bible, I realize that sometimes I hate that. I hate this. I'll admit it to you. Sometimes I need to just wait on God. Sometimes I need to trust God, and God will, in the end, meet my deepest need rather than satisfy my immediate wants. But after waiting, he went. Love waited, and then love went. In verses 17 through 27, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. 4 days, remember that. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews who had come to Mary and Martha to console him about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. And Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to him, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said, "Yeah, I know. Yeah. He'll rise at the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" And she said, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the one coming into the world." So Jesus arrived and found that Lazarus had already been in a tomb for 4 days. Now, what's interesting about that reference for 4 days is that the Jewish folks at the time of Jesus believed that after 3 days being dead, your spirit leaves the body. So 4 days means that you're not just dead, you're good, and you are dead as a doornail. Notice when Martha heard Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. Mary stayed at home. Remember Mary and Martha's story where Martha was busy and Mary sat at the feet of Jesus. Martha is more of the activist, and so she went out. Mary is the more contemplative person, so she stayed there. And Martha said, "Had you been here, Jesus, my brother would not have died." And Jesus said, "Your brother will rise again," telling her that he would fulfill, again, her greatest need rather than fulfilling and satisfying her immediate want. Martha says, "Yeah, I know he'll rise at the last day." And then Jesus said, "Yes, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this?" And Martha says, "Yes, I believe." So as the story progresses, Jesus and Mary and Martha and several others go to the tomb where Lazarus had already been dead, and there was much weeping and wailing. And Jesus' response in 11:35 is so important. Shortest verse in the Bible, John 11:35, at the tomb, Jesus wept. Jesus wept. It's the shortest verse in the Bible, but I think one of the most important and powerful and profound. Jesus wept. It tells us that genuine faith doesn't mean we lose all emotion. Emotion can be good. Some people think if you really trust God and know what God's going to work out, in the end that there's heaven waiting for you, then all the problems on earth, they don't matter so much. But Jesus wept. Jesus wept. I had a confirmation kid. I asked him to, kids are supposed to choose their favorite Bible verse, and one of the little ruffian of a kid said, "Well, what's the short," because they had to say it. They had to say it at confirmation. And he said, "What's the shortest verse in the Bible?" And I said, "Well, Jesus wept." And he said, "I'll choose that one." And I said, "Well, it's probably a good one for you," but I was just kidding. At the beginning, I said that had Jesus taken Pastoral Care 101 at the seminary, he would have failed, but he would have gotten an A here because Jesus wept. Jesus shows us that we need to enter into life with people. Even if we're confused, we need to be with people who are grieving. Jesus could have said to them, "Wait, just stop your crying. Let me show you what I'm going to do. Stop your sniffling." But instead, he wept with them, and then he showed them what he could do. Think about that with people in your life. Do you listen to them? Do you be there with them? Or do you preach to them? Do you try to get quickly to the solution and solve it? I mean, I love to solve things, but sometimes it's important just to be entering into the pain of someone else and just to be there and listen. So verses 38 through 50. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and there was a stone lying against it, like there would be a stone lying against the tomb of Jesus. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Mary, the sister of the dead man, said, "Lord, it's going to stink. He's already been there 4 days, good and dead as a doornail." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew you always hear me, but this done for the sake of the crowd." When he said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his head and hands bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to him, "Unbind him and let him go." What does Jesus do? He yells, "Come out." Lazarus' name means God is my help. And in his situation, dead as a doornail, God was his only help. Lazarus comes out of the tomb. Notice several things in the raising of Lazarus. First, Jesus was deeply moved when he came to the tomb. He wept. He was deeply moved. He cares deeply about us, emotional pain. Jesus cares more about that in the Gospel of John than the other Gospels. He deeply cares about the pain of people. Second, he tells them to move away the stone. He tells them to move away the stone. He gives them something to do. Instead of saying, "Abracadabra, y'all come out of the tomb," he gives them something to do, which, as we talked about in the wedding feast, when he changed the water into wine, he gave them something to do. He let them participate in the miracle. That's a regular theme in the gospel. Jesus asks them to do something. The lepers go to the priest. The blind man took up his pallet. Whatever it is, he invites people into the miracle. And then he tells them to take off the grave clothes and let him go. He invited them into the miracle to do what they could do so that God could do only what God could do. And finally, notice the detail about Lazarus. Verse 44. The dead man came out, his heads and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said, "Unbind him and let him go." Lazarus was bound with strips of cloth. Remember who was also bound and wrapped in cloth? They called it swaddling cloth, but it's the same thing. It was Jesus. Mary wrapped Jesus in strips of cloth, in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger. Jesus would one day be unbound to show the real glory of God. Jesus would one day really be the resurrection and the life. Jesus would one day show the glory of God to the world. So when you're feeling alone in a valley that you're in, remember that sometimes, I hate to say this, but you gotta wait to see the glory of God revealed in your life. When you feel alone in any kind of valley, remember that Jesus wept. He weeps over challenges that you face. Remember the strips of cloth that wrapped Lazarus, that coddled Jesus to bring us faith in this marvelous work of God, who comes into our world as a little baby in the manger and the Christ of the cross. Remember that you have a Lord and Savior who cares about you and is willing to do whatever it takes to help you get to know him more and more in a relationship that's real and personal. Remember that all of our waiting will remind us and bring us to Jesus wrapped in strips of cloth, lying in a manger, who was raised from the dead, who is the resurrection and the life. All kinds of good stuff to remember in this gospel reading from John chapter 11. I hope it was helpful to you. I hope you take good care. Make it a great day, and until the next episode, take good care of yourself. Bye-bye.